This is an introduction to modeling your cost structure and revenue streams. We do this by modeling the income and expenses for each player on your value chain in a way that lets you see how the numbers will change as your enterprise grows. So to begin, you need to define the unit economics of your enterprise. So the unit economics asks you to look at the cost versus price of a single unit of your product. Now, most businesses are not profitable or sustainable until they reach a certain scale. So for example, a village kiosk selling purified water at 1 gallon per day is almost certainly not going to be profitable. But maybe selling 500 gallons per day could actually be a really good business at the kiosk level. But for a social enterprise that distributes water and water purification equipment to village level kiosks, the unit might be the number of kiosks operating. So for them, having just 1 or 2 or even 5 kiosks is also probably not a sustainable or profitable business. But instead they need 10 or 50 or 100 kiosks to be a profitable business. So as you do your analysis, you'll discover that parts of the value chain are not able to break even at a certain volume. Like we said, 1 gallon per day at the water kiosk isn't going to be enough. So the key question is, at what volume of sales, at what number of units do you break even? Do you begin to make a profit? And once you find that number, then you know that your goal is to get to that number. And your goal as an enterprise is to help everyone on the value chain reach that break-even number. Because if they can't get to that break-even number and surpass it, then you're not going to have a sustainable partnership. So as you're going through the costs in this financial modeling to figure out what your business, how much it will cost to run your business at different levels of scale, starting from what might be your current pilot level stage up to larger and larger volumes, there are some key things, cost elements that often don't get fully accounted for in these financial models that you should be sure to take into account. Starting with sales and marketing. So think about the cost to get each new customer and what does it take to retain those customers. So that can be your own staff time, which will grow, and the faster you're trying to expand, the more staff you'll need. It will also be costs like partnerships, marketing budgets, advertising. All those marketing materials have real costs, and as you scale and expand, those costs go up. So that needs to be included in your model. Another key question that is often missed is around service, follow-up, technical support, warranty coverage. What does it cost to keep an existing customer happy? If you can't keep your existing customers happy, not only do you lose them, but then it's harder to attract new customers. So when you're figuring out these costs, you need to understand which parts are part of your standard package. In other words, which ones you don't get any extra revenue for, such as a warranty claim. You actually have to pay for that. But other parts that might be paid for. So for example, if your product requires an annual cleaning, if it's a stove and it has to be cleaned every year or have repairs, the customer might actually pay for those as long as they're ready to do it and able, and as long as you're able to provide the repair at the cost that's reasonable for the customer. So if it's paid for by the customer, it's not so much of a problem, but if it's an extra cost that your enterprise incurs, then that needs to be worked into the financial model. So we'll go through, to create this, the easiest way is often to start with the customer and work backwards to your enterprise. So for example, if you have a product or service that saves a customer money or has some other financial benefit, you can calculate the payback period. In other words, how long it takes them to save the money that they invested in buying your product. Then you can go through to the distributor and think about their costs for distributing your product and the revenue stream and what their break-even point is. In other words, how many products they have to be selling in order to have a viable business. And then lastly, we'll get to calculating the financial model for your enterprise. And from your enterprise's point of view, it's actually not the cost of providing to the end customer but it's the cost of providing the product or service to the distributors in this example. And on top of that, we add the cost for you to manage those distributors and your revenue in return, and then what your enterprise's break-even point is typically, and how many distributors you would need for the enterprise. So let's go through that in a little more detail, starting again with the customer payback period. So you'll see here a very simplified example to explain the concept. If we've got a fuel-saving cook stove that costs $20, someone who's now spending $10 a month on fuel, in month one they buy your stove, all of a sudden now they're saving $5 each month on fuel. So in 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, they've saved $20, which is the cost of the stove. So this is what we call a 4-month payback period. Now this doesn't mean that they pay in installments. They might buy that stove all at once for $20, but they've saved up the money over those 4 months. Now, one thing a lot of social entrepreneurs have told us is that while this makes sense to those of us who maybe have a better education level and are used to thinking on a longer term way like this, many of the base of pyramid consumers who might be your customers might not actually think this way, and they just think about the upfront cost. But nonetheless, it's important for you to understand this benefit, and maybe you don't show them these kinds of charts, but you need to help them understand the long-term benefit of buying your product over those 4 months. Another key concept for building your financial model is the notion of fixed versus variable costs. So fixed costs are the costs that you would have to pay regardless of how many goods or services you're delivering. So for example, your office rent, your office supplies, administrative salaries, accountants, marketing, telephone, those costs are going to be there whether you sell 0 units, 1 unit, 100 units, 1,000 units. And so those are fixed costs, which is in contrast to the variable costs. Variable costs are those associated with the product or service that you're delivering. So in other words, the raw materials, the product installation, the sales commissions, those go up directly with the number of units sold. So when we see this on a graph, the reason that's important is your total costs are going to be, of course, your fixed costs plus your variable costs. And as you can see here, the fixed costs stay about the same as more and more units are sold, but your total costs go up according to the number of units are sold. And the reason this is important is then if you think about our cost per unit, if you're selling a small number of units, that cost per unit is very high. So it's unlikely to be profitable or even sustainable. But as the number of units goes up, then your cost per unit starts going down. And so our goal is to figure out the break-even point of what's the minimum number of units we need to sell where our financial model really works. And this break-even point we can see on this graph. Again, if you look at the graph here of the fixed costs, the variable costs, and the third line that we've added there is the revenue, in other words, the income. So for small numbers of units over there to the left of the dotted line, it looks like we're losing quite a bit of money. And then to the right, when we're selling, in this example, 2,000 units, there's lots of profit. So what is the break-even point? And we can see on this graph that it's 1,000 units. Of course, yours may be different. But this type of modeling is what we're trying to get towards, to see what your business looks like at these different stages. It's at the early stage, how much capital do we need to subsidize those early operating losses, which are inevitable? What's the break-even point? And then what our business looks like at some of those large volumes and hopefully large profits, whether that's profit that goes to your investors or whether it's profit as in surplus income that you invest back into your organization and for more social benefit.